Hi there, crime fighters. Today was a very interesting In Touch, where Officer Don and Ray the DA discussed sentencing and how there really isn't any truth in it anymore. Thanks for listening, crime fighters. Join us next week. This is In Touch.
With Fayette Commonwealth's attorney Ray Larson. We often talk about the parole board, and the system here in Kentucky. You know, in general, Ray, just to sum it up, you feel like that parole should be abolished.
I think we ought to, yes. I think what happens in the court system ought to be truth.
Mm-hmm.
When there's a sentence, that ought to be the sentence. And in Kentucky, our criminal-friendly laws, and I told this to the parole board, I said, look, you all are doing what our criminal-friendly laws set up. So I can't fuss at you. I can fuss about the whole process. Now, and I said, let me explain. I said, this Glenn Donahue, we went through this trial, and the trial went on, and it was, he was charged with murder, wanton murder. And
tell us a little bit about that case. There's some specific things that came up in trial that a lot of people were not aware of. You know, Brian was run over by this guy. Okay,
right.
And what some people think could have been an accident. Why do you not think it was an accident that Officer Dunn was run over? What came up in trial there?
Well, okay, you got to go back and remember what some of the things this Donahue guy said, because he has a long history.
Okay, so
with
first
the
you start with
Lexington
his
Police
history.
Department.
He has a long history with Lexington Police Department.
Yeah, and he has said many times that he was going to kill a Lexington policeman.
Okay, so you have that.
So that's coming in. Then you have like in all vehicle reconstruction things, you see what happens. This is a two-lane, North Lime is a two-lane, actually it's 4 lanes really, because there's room on each side to park and still have 2 lanes. It's one way going out of town. This guy, clearly, we could show that this guy clearly just kind of aimed his vehicle where Brian Derman was standing. So he was standing, he responded to a loud music complaint.
Unassociated with...
Yeah, well, unassociated with this yard bird.
He was responding to a simple loud music call, getting out of his cruiser, when this guy ran over him with his car.
And Brian was not standing in the middle of the road.
Okay.
He was standing very close. The door was open. He was talking to a guy in this SUV about turning the music down, kind of thing. Standing right next to the vehicle, to that car. And we have this Derman guy kind of, I contend, aiming at him, because we had damage to all of the vehicles that kind of indicated.
So after he ran over the police officer,
he took off.
He took off, and where did he go then?
Then he went out to some apartment over by the Legends baseball field.
Okay, and then what happened?
Well, then the police found him, and it was really interesting because they were looking for a vehicle, and a police officer who was undercover, doing drug stuff, saw a car, and he thought, this, and he went around and saw there was damage on it, called it in. Well, the next thing you know, the SWAT team, so that's an assault second.
So he runs over. This guy we had evidence that he said he wanted to kill a Lexington police officer. He runs over a Lexington police officer. He then stabs a Lexington police officer who's trying to arrest him. Okay?
Yeah.
All that comes up in trial.
Yeah.
Right.
And he was bottom line is, jury's out forever. Turns out it was 11-1 for a murder conviction. Right. We had one person on the jury who, I'm told, didn't want to convict anybody ever of anything.
Okay.
And we hope we would have, if somebody has that kind of issue, they shouldn't serve on a jury. You know.
Okay. So that's how it wound up.
That's
with the lesser charge of manslaughter.
Manslaughter second degree, which is not a at the time was not a violent crime. For whatever reason, the legislature came up with that one.
Well, it's still not violent for anyone other than a police officer or
Yeah,
firefighter, right?
and that's not fair.
No, it's not.
I mean, they run over. If they run over you,
Yeah,
it's a nonviolent
I mean,
crime.
we're glad and pleased that they've decided to make that exception for police and firefighters. But the truth of it is, if anybody runs over you with a car and you can prove that it's to that level, it's a violent crime.
Okay, now, so I want to get back to this fact that our whole criminal-friendly sentencing law scam is just that, a scam. Okay, so this guy is convicted of a number of charges that total 30 years.
Okay.
The jury recommends that they run consecutive for 30 years. Well, our law says, you can only stack those sentences to a maximum of 20 years.
Okay.
So that
Funny
right,
math comes in, and now he's at
so
20.
right there, that's a lie.
Okay.
You see, so the judge sentences this character to 20 years because that's all he can do, and he
Yeah.
spent all kind of time trying to explain that to
Yeah.
everybody. So that happens. Then he gets into prison. Well, guess what? First thing they say is, well, that 20 years really isn't 20 years because we're going to give you what we call good time credit. Meaning, if you go to prison and you are a good boy in prison, then we're going to cut about a 30-year sentence off automatically. So that 20 years is 13 years. See? Then you add on to that this idea that this is a nonviolent crime, and this yo-yo is eligible for parole after serving only 20%.
Of 13.
No, it's of 20, you
20,
see.
20, okay.
Yeah,
20% of 20.
yeah. So that's 4 years, and that's why we had this parole hearing, because it's coming up on 4 years that this guy has been in custody, you see.
Well, tell us what happens at a parole hearing. You have the victim.
This is a victim hearing before the parole board, because before, a long time ago, they didn't even care about victims, and they just would do the parole hearing.
Yes.
And in this instance, they had a hearing for victims, the family of Brian Durman.
Who makes up the parole board, real quick?
Well, they're political appointees.
Okay.
Um,
The governor appoints the parole board?
Governor appoints
Are
them.
they paid? You know?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a full-time job.
Is it?
Yeah.
All right.
So what happens is they sent a letter, it's a form letter, that they sent Brandy Durman, the widow of Brian Durman, got this letter and said, we're going to limit you to 10 people in the hearing room, and you've got 30 minutes to make your presentation. Well, that just offended the hell out of everybody. So Brandy was down just whining and complaining about that, and I don't blame her. And I said, hey, why don't we do an online petition so that everybody that wants to support the concept of keeping this character in prison for 20 years, or 13 years,
Yeah.
has a chance. And so that happened. Now, what happened was there were 11,818 people signed that petition online. They are representatives from all 50 states, 11 foreign countries, and I'm guessing that the vast majority of them are police officers or police wives that paying attention to this all over the world to see what happens. I mean, it's a very effective thing. Well, it turns out at this hearing that they waived their 10-person. There were 55 people in there, 19 police officers in that group. The police chief was there. I was there. Brandy Durman was there, and Brandy talked about she had something that she worked on. And I asked her for a copy of it, and she let me have one. And among other things, she said, there's a void, this is what she told the parole board, there's a void that will never be filled. And that horrific night is never far from our minds. Not a single day goes by that Mr. Donahuy's poor choices don't affect my life and the life of our young son, Braden. She said, Braden and I spoke to Brian 15 minutes before he was killed. We talked about how our day had gone. Braden told his dad that he had been a good boy that day. And we said, I love you one last time. He doesn't know how, this defendant doesn't know how Braden fell asleep right after that phone call. And when he woke up the next morning, his daddy was gone. It's hard to explain to a 4-year-old that daddy will never come home. He will never be able to play with you, hug you, or kiss you good night again. Now, that's heavy-duty stuff. And why do you have these victims' hearings? Because the parole board needs to understand the other side of this issue. The public expects justice. That if you violate the law, you take somebody's life, you better be prepared to suffer the consequences. And if our legislature doesn't create consequences, then why in the hell do we have laws in the first place? And that's the whole point. And even the laws we have don't tell the truth.
Well, and the victims, you know, once they think they have some justice and somebody's sentenced, you know, for killing their loved one, it just begins for them because they have to come back and face this parole board time and time again and basically beg them to keep this person in prison. And if you talk to most victims, they'll tell you that the most significant thing, they feel powerless. They just feel so powerless. You know, to me, if you want to have a parole system, it should be something like this. The only way that you're going to get parole is if the victim comes to us by their choice and petitions for your release. That way the victims can sit there for the 30 years and go, you know what, this person's in prison because I'm a part of keeping them there. It's a power thing then. And then it makes them feel better to know that I'm part of the reason this person's in prison. I'm being represented. As opposed to you have to go and beg that they don't let them out.
That's the offensive part.
That is just awful.
When I go to a lot of these hearings, and I get so angry watching people who have had loved ones killed, mostly, have to beg for a parole board to uphold what a jury saw, heard, and decided.
Well, let me tell you something that's ridiculous. I read an article yesterday that the governor, was it Jerry Brown in California, they now are releasing lifers, people that were sentenced to life and meant to be there for life. Like 1,300 have been released in California so far. These are people for murder and rape that have just done god-awful things. And they're getting out of prison now in droves. And this, it sounds too unbelievable to be true, but it really is. It is. They're releasing so many that you can't even, the victims are just snuffed out. They can't complain. You don't know where to start, you know?
Oh, it's powerless thing you're talking about.
And there's really very few people, there's very few Ray Larsons in California that will stand up to.
I'll tell you, there's one guy out there, his name is Mike Ramos.
Yeah.
And he's in San Bernardino. And he's on the National District Attorneys Association Board of Directors with me.
Yeah.
And he's bald. And all we do is get out there at that board meeting, kick ass, and take names.
Glad that he's fighting the good fight out west. We'll see you next week on In Touch.